Deep beneath the vast, continent-spanning imperial palace on Terra, in a laboratory of impossible scale and secrecy, the Emperor of Mankind stood at the precipice of his greatest work. He was clad in his golden auramite power armor, a radiant giant of 12 feet, his features a mask of serene, focused power. Before him, a great archway shimmered, not with light, but with a controlled, stable tear in the fabric of reality. This was his project, his hope, his answer to the anathema of the warp, the imperial webway. He was a being of pure, rational, scientific order in a galaxy of screaming, chaotic madness. He had waged his great crusade to unite humanity, and this was the final piece. A way to connect his new imperium, a way to cut the cancer of the warp gods out of human travel forever. He was a god denying his own divinity, a scientist playing with the very fabric of creation. He reached out with his mind, a psychic presence so vast it dwarfed suns, and pushed, gently, into the veil. He was seeking to map the corridors, to stabilize the pathways. His mind, a golden sun of pure, ordered will, touched something. It was not the familiar, shrieking madness of the chaos gods. It was something else, a single, cold, and utterly malevolent point of will, ancient and dark but lesser than what he knew. It was a focused, tyrannical consciousness, a dark lord in its own, smaller reality, in the process of exerting its own dominion. In the land of Mordor, in a world beyond the Emperor's knowledge, Sauron, the Dark Lord, had just reclaimed his full power, and his great eye was sweeping across the lands, his will a tangible, oppressive force. He was searching for his lost, ultimate weapon. The two forces, the Emperor's radiant, ordered probe and Sauron's dark, searching malice brushed against each other across the dimensions. The feedback was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Sauron's magic, a thing of spirit and song, reacted violently with the Emperor's pure, psychic, scientific will. A feedback loop erupted. The stable webway arch before the Emperor roared, destabilized, and tore open. It was no longer a gate, it was a wound. A vortex of golden and black energy engulfed the Emperor. He felt his physical form dematerialize, his connection to the Golden Throne, to Terra, severed. He, who had mastered all things, was for a single, terrifying instant adrift. He was pulled through the tear. The transition was a psychic scream. He rematerialized with the force of a falling star. His golden armored form, wreathed in residual psychic fire, slammed into the soft green earth of a rolling plain, carving a long, smoking, and perfectly straight furrow. He had landed in the grasslands of Rohan. His arrival was not a quiet one. It was a scar of perfect geometric order, burned into the wild, untamed heart of Middle-earth. The Emperor's arrival was not a subtle event. It was a psychic detonation. His very presence, a concentration of psychic power, and 30,000 years of focused will, was anathema to the quiet, ancient, song-like magic of Middle-earth. In the forest of Fangorn, Gandalf the White, newly returned from his battle with the Balrog, was brought to his knees. He gripped his staff as a blinding, agonizing psychic light, brighter and colder than 1,000 suns, erupted in his consciousness. It was not the familiar hot malice of Sauron, nor the pure celestial light of the Valar. It was a new thing, a terrifying, righteous, and utterly tyrannical light, a sun of pure, unbending, and alien order. In the depths of Barad-dûr, the great eye of Sauron flinched. The Dark Lord reeled back from his palantir as if struck. He, too, had felt it, an anathema, a golden, burning, psychic presence that was not of the Valar, not of Eru, but something else, something utterly hostile, impossibly powerful, and now burning like a new, rival sun in the west. He was no longer the only Dark Lord in this world. In the golden wood of Lothlorien, the Lady Galadriel cried out, her mirror cracking from top to bottom. She had tried to perceive the source of the disturbance, to look into its mind. Her own formidable consciousness, the mind of one of the eldest and most powerful of the Eldar, had brushed against it. It was not a mind she could read. It was a fortress. A 30,000-year-old consciousness of pure, unyielding iron, and the brief, psychic counterassault from its passive defenses had scorched her, leaving her terrified and trembling. She had looked at a god who did not know he was a god. The Emperor of Mankind pushed himself to his feet. His golden armor was unscratched. He stood, a 12-foot giant, and surveyed the new, primitive world. His psychic senses, his primary tool, swept across the globe in a single, processing instant. Atmosphere, breathable, gravity, standard, population, human, primitive, feudal state, contaminants. His senses recoiled. The very air was thick with the warp, but a different flavor of it. Less chaotic, more elemental. And it was infested. Xenos signatures, multiple, elven, dwarven, hoarding resources, stagnant. Mutant signatures, prolific, greenskin adjacent, subterranean and surface. Primary threat. He felt the dark, distant, psychic echo of Sauron, major warp entity. Classification, Daemon Lord. Actively corrupting human populations. Unacceptable. He was on a lost human colony world, a world that had fallen into barbarism, superstition, and was now under active assault by both Xenos and demonic forces. His purpose, as always, was clear. He would not find a way home. He would bring this world home. He would save humanity from itself. His great crusade had just found a new, and very unexpected, front. He did not have to wait long for first contact. His arrival, a golden comet carving a scar across the plains of Rohan, had been seen. A company of riders, perhaps 30 strong, crested the nearby hill. They were tall, fair-haired men with spears and round, painted shields, their horses magnificent and powerful. They were the Aird of Eomer, Marshal of the Riddermark, exiled by the corrupted will of his king. They reined in their horses, their eyes wide with terror and awe. The being before them was a giant, clad in armor of sculpted gold, radiating a light and a heat that made the very air shimmer. He was more radiant than any elf lord, more terrifying than any troll. He was a god, or a demon, standing in the smoking crater of his own arrival. "What sorcery is this?" Eomer demanded, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, his voice tight with suspicion. "Are you a new trick of Saruman, a servant of the Dark Lord?" The Emperor stood motionless, his mind a cold, analytical engine. He focused on the lead rider, Eomer. He did not ask questions. He took the answers. He extended a psychic tendril and performed a swift, effortless mind scan. Eomer's world exploded. He felt a presence in his mind, a power so vast it was like the sky itself descending. He saw his own life flash before his eyes. His loyalty to Theoden, his love for his sister, his hatred of Grima Wormtongue, his fear of Saruman in his Tower of Orthanc, the despair of his exile. In less than a second, the Emperor had it all. The language, Rohirric, and the common speech. The political situation, a corrupted king, a traitorous wizard. The primary enemies, Saruman, Sauron, orcs. The local allies Gondor, and disgustingly, elves and dwarves. The scan was complete. He lowered his hand. "Saruman is a heretic." The Emperor's voice boomed, amplified by his armor, his words spoken in perfect, unaccented Rohirric. "A failed psyker who has turned from the path of true human advancement. Sauron is a major warp entity, a daemon lord who must be purged. The orcs are a mutant strain of greenskin, an abomination to be exterminated." Eomer and his men stared, their minds reeling. This thing not only spoke their language, but in a single instant had laid bare the entire strategic and theological reality of their world. "Who? What are you?" Eomer breathed, his sword held forgotten in his hand. "I am the Emperor of Mankind," the golden giant replied, his voice absolute, a sound of unshakable divine authority. "I am the master and protector of all humanity. You are a lost, primitive colony, and I have come to save you from the darkness. You will serve me in this task. Your loyalty is no longer to your failed king. It is to your species. It is to me." He was not asking. He was informing them of a fact that had just become true. Before Éomer could even begin to process this reality-shattering declaration, a new sound cut through the air. A guttural, howling war cry echoing from a nearby ravine. A warband of Uruk-hai, Saruman's shock troops, crested the ridge. They were 100 strong, a black tide of iron and hate, their broad-bladed swords held high. They had seen the fallen star and had come to investigate, their brutish minds expecting treasure or, at the very least, men flesh to slaughter. They saw the Rohirrim, they saw the golden giant. They saw only prey. For Saruman, their captain roared, and they charged, a clattering, chaotic avalanche of armored muscle. Éomer and his riders formed a desperate, back-to-back circle, their spears leveled. They were outnumbered 3-1. It was a good day to die. The Emperor did not even turn to look at them. He simply raised a hand. "Hold," he commanded. He strode forward to meet the Uruk-hai charge. Alone, the Uruks laughed, their harsh voices like grinding stone. This single, shining fool was coming to meet them? They would tear him apart. They were 10 feet away when the Emperor unleashed his power. It was not a fire. It was not a spell. It was a wave. A focused, controlled, psychic firestorm. A golden light, brighter than the sun, erupted from his form. It was not just heat. It was pure, righteous order. It was the anathema. The Uruk-hai in the front rank did not even have time to scream. They were not just burned, they were unmade. Their physical forms were incinerated. Their dark, corrupted spirits, the mud-born souls given to them by Saruman, were instantly and permanently erased. The wave of golden fire rolled over the entire Uruk-hai warband. In one, silent, blinding instant, 100 of Saruman's finest warriors were turned into a cloud of fine black ash that drifted on the wind. The charge was over. The battle was over. The enemy was gone. The Emperor stood in the center of the smoking, blackened patch of ground, his golden armor undimmed, his face a mask of cold, impassive judgment. Behind him, the Rohirrim stared, their horses trembling, their spears held in nerveless hands. They had not just witnessed a great warrior. They had not just seen a powerful wizard. They had seen a god wield its divine wrath. They had seen an army of their most hated enemies destroyed in the blink of an eye. Their world had changed. Their allegiances had shattered. Their definitions of power were obsolete. Éomer, Marshal of the Riddermark, a proud and noble warrior prince, slowly dismounted. He walked forward, his footsteps unsteady on the scorched earth. He stopped 10 feet from the golden giant, his mind a vortex of terror and awe. He dropped his sword, the clatter of steel loud in the sudden, profound silence. And he knelt. One by one, the other 30 riders of his era did the same. They knelt in the mud and the ash, their heads bowed, their souls given over not to a king, but to a deity. The Emperor of mankind looked down upon his first new subjects. He accepted their worship. It was, after all, only logical. It was the proper, natural order of things. The annihilation of the Uruk-hai warband and the subsequent psychic detonation of the Emperor's power was an event that did not go unnoticed. Sauron, in his dark tower, felt the sudden, violent erasure of 100 corrupted souls. But more than that, he felt the golden, anathema light of the one who had done it. This golden king was not just a warrior. He was a purifier. He was a direct, spiritual, and existential threat to Sauron's very nature. This was not a rival to be defeated. This was a plague to be exterminated. Sauron's rage was a cold, calculating thing. He would not waste his orc legions against a being who could incinerate them at will. He would send his ultimate weapon. He would send the darkness that could not be fought by conventional means. He would send the terror that broke the minds of men. He unleashed the Nine. From the dead city of Minas Morgul, 9 black, shrieking shapes rose into the sky. They were not mounted on their horses. They were mounted on their fell beasts, the great, reptilian, winged horrors bred in the pits of Mordor. The Nine, led by the Witch King of Angmar, the greatest sorcerer of their age, were given a single, absolute command: find the golden anomaly, destroy him. His power is a light that insults the master. Extinguish it. The Emperor was leading his new, fanatically devoted army of Rohirrim back towards Edoras. He was a golden sun at the head of a column of awestruck, terrified soldiers. The sky went dark, not with clouds, but with a sudden, unnatural, oppressive gloom. A high, thin, piercing wail cut through the air, a sound that bypassed the ears and plunged like a shard of ice directly into the soul. The Rohirrim cried out. Their horses screamed and reared, their eyes rolling in terror. The soldiers fell from their saddles, clutching their heads, their courage, the legendary courage of the Riddermark, shattered. They lay on the ground, weeping, immobilized by a wave of pure, supernatural despair. This was the Black Breath. This was the power of the Nazgul. 9 great, black, winged shadows descended from the swirling dark clouds. The fell beasts circled, their croaking shrieks adding to the chorus of terror. The Emperor of Mankind stood alone in a field of his cowering, broken soldiers. He looked up, his face impassive, his mind analytical. Classification: major psychic entities, demonic, incorporeal, source of psychic aura, fear, despair. Weaponry: magical, warp-based blades, airborne Xenos mounts, threat level, high to primitives, moderate to self. He saw the Witch King, larger than the others, his presence a vortex of cold malice, point a long, armored finger at him. He felt the combined, focused will of all 9 wraiths, a psychic assault designed to break his mind, to fill his soul with the same paralyzing despair that had felled the Rohirrim. The combined psychic assault of all 9 Nazgul was a force that had broken kingdoms. It was the concentrated, spiritual despair of 9 great kings, amplified by the malice of their master and the power of their rings. It was a wave of pure, soul-crushing dread, and it washed over the lone golden figure on the plains. The Emperor of Mankind felt the attack as a cold, irritating, and ultimately pathetic whisper. He had stood against the howling, reality-shattering madness of the Chaos Gods. He had shielded a galaxy with the sheer, unbending force of his own will. This was the psychic equivalent of a child's nightmare. He was disgusted. This was the great power of this world's shadow. This was the ultimate weapon of the Daemon Lord, Sauron. It was weak, pathetic, an insult. He did not just resist the attack, he countered it. He did not unleash a firestorm. He did not raise a shield. He simply was. He let a fraction of his own true, psychic aura, his anathema, blaze forth. It was not a fire. It was a sun of pure, blinding, and utterly indifferent order. A golden light, a psychic presence of such vast, righteous, and terrible certainty that it was fundamentally, elementally hostile to the very concept of shadow and despair. The Nazgul's aura of terror didn't just break, it incinerated. The 9 ringwraiths shrieked, a new, terrible sound. It was not their war cry of terror. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated, spiritual agony. The golden light of the Emperor's presence was not just a shield. It was a poison to their shadowy, undead nature. Their very beings, held together by Sauron's will and dark sorcery, were being unmade by its purifying radiance. The fell beasts, creatures of flesh and shadow, were the first to die. The golden light struck them, and they dissolved in midair, their reptilian forms exploding into black dust. The 9 Nazgul, their mounts gone, their power shattered, fell to the earth, their black robes pooling on the ground. They were now exposed, their connection to the shadow world severed, their spirits held, screaming, in the material plane by the Emperor's blinding light. The Witch King of Angmar, the greatest sorcerer of men, pushed himself to his knees. He raised his Morgul blade, his hand trembling. "No man can kill me," he hissed, the prophecy his only remaining shield. The Emperor strode towards him, his golden armor radiating a light so bright it was burning the very grass around his feet. "I am not a man. The Emperor's voice boomed, a sound of absolute final judgment. I am mankind. He did not use his sword. He simply raised his gauntleted hand. He reached out with his mind, a golden, psychic talon, and he seized the Witch King's essence. He felt the ring that gave the Wraith his power, a conduit to the distant, cowering will of Sauron. The Emperor pulled. He did not just pull at the ring. He pulled at the very strand of Sauron's power that was invested in it. He seized the fragment of the Dark Lord's soul that was bound to the Nazgul. In his dark tower, Sauron roared, a sound of pure, shocked agony, as he felt his own power, his own being drawn out of him, across the continent, by an impossible, golden force. The Emperor closed his fist. He crushed the ring of power, not with physical force, but with a single, psychic, annihilating act of will. The ring, and the fragment of Sauron's soul within it, was not just broken, it was erased. The Witch King of Angmar let out one final, thin, and utterly surprised sigh, and his robes, his armor, and his ancient bones collapsed into a pile of fine white dust. The Emperor turned his gaze to the other 8, cowering, shrieking wraiths. One by one, he repeated the process. A psychic grasp, a pull, a clench of his fist. One by one, the remaining rings of power were destroyed, their wearers unmade, their connection to Sauron permanently, irrevocably severed. In Barad-dûr, Sauron collapsed, his great eye flickering violently. He had not just lost his greatest servants, he had lost 9 parts of himself. He had been permanently, catastrophically wounded, his own power diminished, his very essence torn apart by a being whose power he could not comprehend. On the plains of Rohan, the Emperor of Mankind stood in the center of 9 small piles of dust. The black breath was gone. The darkness had lifted. The Rohirrim, their minds freed, slowly, shakily rose to their feet. They looked at their golden god, who had just unmade the unkillable, and their awe was now a thing of pure, absolute, and terrifying religious fanaticism. The psychic cataclysm of the Nazgul's final, true death was a blast that shook the foundations of Middle-earth. Gandalf the White, riding Shadowfax across the plains, felt it as a chorus of 9 distinct, agonizing screams, followed by a wave of pure, golden, and terrifyingly cold light. He spurred his horse, his heart a hammer of dread and wonder. The power of Sauron had just been dealt a blow he had not thought possible. But the power that dealt it was not the gentle light of the Valar. It was a sun, a tyrant's son. He found the Emperor on the plains, surrounded by the kneeling, weeping, and praying Rohirrim. The golden giant stood among them, his hand on Eomer's head, in a gesture that looked like a blessing but felt like a claiming. The air was pure, clean, and utterly devoid of shadow. What have you done? Gandalf breathed, reining in Shadowfax, his white robes a stark, simple contrast to the Emperor's Baroque golden glory. The Emperor turned his luminous, inhuman gaze upon the wizard. He analyzed him in an instant. Entity class. Maiar, warp spawn. Angelic variant. Designation. Istari, local psyker enforcer. Threat. Moderate. Potential utility. High. I have done what you, in your millennia of failure, could not. The Emperor's voice boomed, the words striking Gandalf with the force of a physical blow. I have destroyed the primary lieutenants of the archenemy. I have cleansed this land of their taint, permanently. Gandalf stared. Destroyed? You mean banished? I mean destroyed, the Emperor clarified, his voice laced with contempt for the wizard's lack of understanding. Their anchors, the rings as your mind calls them, have been unmade. Their souls, such as they were, have been erased. They will not return. Gandalf's mind reeled. Such a feat was not possible. Not for any power in Arda, not even for Sauron himself. This being, he operated outside the very laws of their reality. Who are you? Gandalf asked, his voice now a low, fearful whisper. I am the master of mankind, the Emperor replied, his patience already wearing thin. I am here to save your species. This world is a lost colony, a jewel that has fallen into the hands of Xenos, mutants, and daemons. I am reclaiming it, This wizard you serve, Saruman, is a heretic who has fallen to the archenemy. The Dark Lord Sauron is a greater daemon who must be purged. And the elves and dwarves, they are Xenos, filth. They are a blight upon the future of humanity, and they, too, will be cleansed. Gandalf's blood ran cold. The sheer, unadulterated, genocidal certainty in the Emperor's voice was more terrifying than all the malice of Sauron. Sauron wanted to enslave. This being wanted to purify. "You are mad," Gandalf cried, his staff flaring to life. "The elves and dwarves are our allies. We fight for the freedom of all the free peoples, not just men." "Freedom is an illusion," the Emperor stated, his voice flat. "It is a luxury humanity cannot afford while the alien and the heretic draw breath. Your alliance is a weakness, a sentimental folly that has allowed this world to rot for 1,000 years. You, wizard, are a powerful psyker. Your purpose is to guide and protect humanity. You have failed. You will now serve me in this great crusade, or you will be classified as an obstacle." He offered not an alliance. He offered a choice: obedience or destruction. Gandalf looked at the golden god before him. He saw no room for negotiation, no hint of compassion. Only the cold, hard, and utterly inhuman logic of an absolute tyrant who believed, with every fiber of his being, that he was the savior. "I will not," Gandalf said, his voice a low, hard declaration. "Your path is one of tyranny. It is no different from the shadow you claim to fight. I will stand against you, as I stand against Sauron." "A pity," the Emperor said, a flicker of what might have been disappointment in his luminous eyes. "Then you are a fool, and an enemy of man. You will be dealt with. But first, the traitors." He turned his back on Gandalf, a gesture of absolute dismissal, and began his march towards Edoras. The Emperor's mind was a vast, cold, analytical engine. With the Nazgul erased, his psychic senses could now sweep across Middle-earth unhindered, painting a clear, tactical picture of his new dominion. He felt the scattered, terrified kingdoms of Men-Gondor, the remnants of Arnor. He felt the primitive, nomadic tribes of the east and south, already in thrall to the great enemy. He felt the pockets of mutant filth, the orcs and goblins infesting the mountains and the dark corners of the world. And he felt them, 2 points of significant, concentrated, and utterly alien power. To the west, in a hidden valley, he felt a gathering of Xenos minds, their psychic presence a clear, bright, and offensively arrogant chime: Rivendell. And to the east, in a great, dark forest, he felt another, a presence of immense, ancient, and subtle psychic power, shielded by a powerful warp-based ward, Lothlorien. He focused his immense, penetrating gaze on this second location. He felt the mind of the lady who ruled there, the elven witch Galadriel, and he felt the artifact she wielded, a ring of power, a tool of immense, concentrated, psychic energy, hoarded by this Xenos queen, used to keep her small forested kingdom in a state of unnatural, stagnant preservation. This was the ultimate transgression. He saw it all in a flash of cold, logical insight. These elves, these ancient, dying Xenos, were hoarding power. They were using these powerful artifacts to manipulate the local human populations, to hold back the inevitable, glorious march of human destiny. They were a cancer, an elegant, beautiful, and utterly deadly cancer that had kept mankind in a state of primitive feudalism for millennia. And he felt the connection. He felt the minds of the Dunedain, the pure strain humans he had sensed, and their deep, unnatural reverence and alliance with these elves. He felt the mind of Aragorn, the heir of their greatest kingdom, and his psychic bond with an elven female. This was not just coexistence. This was corruption. The Xenos were contaminating the pure human bloodline, twisting the minds of their leaders, holding back their progress. His judgment was absolute. The elves were, perhaps, an even greater and more insidious threat than Sauron himself. Sauron was an obvious, external enemy. The elves were a subtle, internal one, a poison in the heart of humanity. He stood on the plains of Rohan, his golden armor a beacon to his new, kneeling army of Rohirrim. He pointed a gauntleted finger not towards Mordor, but towards the misty, golden forest of Lothlorien. "Your allegiance to the elves is a sin," his voice boomed, a new, holy commandment for his new subjects. "They are aliens. Xenos. They have hoarded the power of this world and kept you as their ignorant, primitive pets. They have weakened your bloodlines and poisoned your minds. They are not your allies. They are your jailers." A new, terrible, and utterly convincing truth washed over the minds of the Rohirrim. Their ancient, half-forgotten reverence for the golden wood was instantly burned away, replaced by a new, cold, and righteous hatred. The Lady of the Wood was not a beautiful, distant queen. She was a witch, a Xenos, hoarding power that belonged to man. "We will purge the great enemy," the Emperor declared. "We will destroy the mutant. And then, we will begin the great purge of the Xenos. We will burn their forests, we will shatter their strongholds, and we will restore humanity to its rightful place as the sole master of this world." For the Emperor, a roar of fanatical, xenocidal agreement rose from the throats of the men of Rohan. The free peoples of Middle-earth were now, officially, broken. The new, terrible war for Middle-earth would not be a war of light versus shadow. It would be a three-way war of order versus chaos versus freedom. And the Emperor had just declared war on two of them. The march on Edoras was a procession of terrifying divine glory. The Emperor of mankind strode at the head of his new, fanatically devoted army of Rohirrim, his golden armor a sun that had descended to earth. The common soldiers, who had lived their lives in a world of horses, steel, and shadow, now walked in the footsteps of a living god who had unmade their greatest fears with a gesture. Their fear of him was absolute, but their worship was even greater. They arrived at the high hill of Edoras, the golden hall of Meduseld gleaming on its summit. The city was in a state of despair, its people cowed, its king a puppet. The Emperor strode to the great wooden doors of the hall. He did not knock. He pushed them open with a single, contemptuous hand, the ancient, carved wood splintering, the massive doors torn from their hinges. He entered the hall. It was dark, the air thick with the smell of stale air and despair. At the far end, on his throne, sat King Theoden. He was a withered, bent, and ancient man, his eyes a milky, vacant blue, his hair a lank, white mess. At his feet, like a pale, coiled snake, sat Grima Wormtongue. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, who had arrived just moments before, stood in the center of the hall, their confrontation with the corrupted king just beginning. They turned, their faces a mask of shock and dread, as the 12-foot-tall, golden-armored God-King strode into the hall, his presence a wave of pure, psychic power that made the very air vibrate. "More guests?" Grima hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. He looked at the Emperor, and his usual oily confidence was replaced by a flicker of genuine animalistic fear. The Emperor's gaze did not fall on Gandalf or Aragorn. It fixed, with a cold, burning intensity, on the sniveling creature at the foot of the throne. He felt the psychic taint on the man, the subtle, poisonous whispers of the heretic Saruman. "You are a vessel of the archenemy." The Emperor's voice boomed, a sound that shook the dust from the high rafters. "A traitor to your species." Grima opened his mouth to reply, to weave his poison. "I am but a humble servant of the—" He never finished the sentence. The Emperor did not wait for a justification. He unleashed his will. A single, focused, and utterly invisible bolt of pure, psychic fire struck Grima. The man stiffened, his eyes widened in a moment of pure, agonized understanding. And then his mind, his soul, his very being was incinerated. A thin, black smoke rose from his mouth and ears, and he collapsed to the ground, a mindless, drooling, empty husk. He was not dead. He was simply gone. Gandalf and Aragorn stared in horror. This was not a healing. This was an execution. The Emperor now turned his terrible, luminous gaze upon King Theoden. He strode to the foot of the throne, his golden form looming over the withered king. "Your mind is infected," the Emperor stated, "by the heretic Saruman. He has bound your will. I will free you. He did not coax. He did not speak words of healing. He did not perform a gentle exorcism. He performed a purge. He reached out his golden gauntlet and placed it on Theoden's head. The king flinched, a low moan in his throat. A wave of pure, golden, psychic fire poured from the emperor's hand and into the king's mind. Theoden screamed. It was a sound of unimaginable, soul-tearing agony. The emperor was not gently untangling Saruman's whispers. He was burning them out. He was scouring Theoden's mind, his memories, his very soul, with a holy, righteous fire. The king's body convulsed on the throne, his back arching, his limbs thrashing. Saruman's will, the deep, insidious infection, fought back, but it was like a candle trying to fight a supernova. It was incinerated in an instant. The light faded. The emperor removed his hand. King Theoden collapsed, panting, his body drenched in sweat. He was no longer a withered old man. His eyes were clear, his back was straight, his mind was his own. He was free. He looked up at the golden, divine being who had saved him, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror, awe, and a new, absolute, and utterly broken subservience. He had not just been healed, he had been broken and remade. He had seen the mind of his new God. His will was no longer his own. It belonged, wholly and forever, to the master of mankind. My lord, Theoden whispered, sliding from his throne to his knees. My life, my kingdom, it is yours. The emperor nodded. It is. He had uplifted the king. He now commanded Rohan. It was into this scene of terrifying divine subjugation that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stepped forward. Gandalf stood apart, his face a mask of pale, horrified understanding. He had just witnessed a healing that was a spiritual violation, a replacement of one dark master with another, far more powerful one. Aragorn, however, still saw a path. His kinsman, Theoden, was free. The Golden Warrior, however brutal, fought their common enemy. Lord, Aragorn began, his voice rough, stepping into the golden light that radiated from the Emperor. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor. We, too, fight the shadow. We seek an alliance. The Emperor turned his gaze upon him. The sheer, psychic weight of that gaze silenced Aragorn instantly. The Emperor was not looking at him. He was analyzing him. His luminous, inhuman eyes swept over Aragorn, his mind a cold, genetic scalpel. He felt the bloodline, the ancient, powerful, and uncorrupted lineage. He felt the echo of Numenor, the whisper of a strength of will and body that was far superior to the primitive Rohirrim. This was not just a primitive. This was a son of true, pure strain humanity. This was a specimen of untold potential. You are Dunedain, the Emperor stated, his voice softening, but only from a roar to a deep, resonant thunder. Pure. Strong. You are wasted in this rabble, playing at being a ranger, consorting with Xenos. He looked at Legolas and Gimli, and his gaze was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. Filth, he said, not to them, but as a simple statement of fact. They are my friends, Aragorn said, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They are an infection, the Emperor corrected him. And your friendship with them is a symptom of your world's disease. But you can be cured. You have the blood of leaders, the genetics of a true warrior. You are not meant to be a king of this mudball. You are meant to be a war master. The Emperor's voice was now imbued with a subtle, psychic resonance, a power of persuasion that made Saruman's voice seem like a child's lisp. He was showing Aragorn a vision, a promise. Kneel to me, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Renounce your Xenos pets. Renounce this deluded, white-robed psyker. Swear your life, your sword, your species, to me, the true master of mankind. And I will make you the war master of this world. I will uplift your people. I will give you the technology, the power, the purpose you have always lacked. We will not just defeat Sauron. We will erase him. And then, together, we will forge a new, glorious imperium of man from the ashes of this pathetic, dying age. We will burn the Xenos from their forests and mountains, and we will restore humanity to its rightful, solitary, and glorious destiny as the masters of this world. This is your true destiny. This is the choice I offer you." It was a temptation beyond anything Aragorn had ever imagined. It was not a whisper of despair or greed. It was a roar of glory, of purpose, of salvation for his people. It was the promise of everything he had ever wanted, but twisted into a shape of absolute, genocidal horror. The Golden Hall of Meduseld was utterly silent. Every being in the room, the kneeling, awestruck Rohirrim, the pale and horrified Gandalf, the proud but terrified Theoden waited for Aragorn's answer. Aragorn looked at the Emperor, at the 1 2-foot-tall being of golden light, whose power was so vast it made the air tremble. He saw the future this savior offered, a future of human supremacy, a future of terrible, righteous conquest, a future where his people would be strong, safe, and utterly dominant, a future bought with the blood of his friends. He saw Legolas, his face pale, his hand on his bow, watching him with a desperate, trusting intensity. He saw Gimli, his axe in hand, his expression a mixture of fear and defiant loyalty. These were not Xenos. They were his brothers. He looked at Gandalf, who met his gaze with a look of profound, weary sadness, knowing that this was the truest test of Aragorn's kingship. Aragorn turned his gaze back to the Emperor. He slowly, deliberately, drew his sword. But he did not kneel. He did not point it at the Emperor. He held it aloft, and the ancient, elven-forged blade, Andúril, the flame of the West, glittered in the golden light of the tyrant. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, ringing with the authority of his ancestors. "I am the heir of Elendil, and I have no king. But if I am to be a king, I will be a king of all free peoples, or none at all." He took a step back, standing shoulder to shoulder with Legolas and Gimli. "I will not be your war master," Aragorn declared. "I will not be your slave, and I will not betray my allies. We fight for the freedom of elves, dwarves, and men, not for the tyranny of one species, and certainly not for the tyranny of one man." A cold, profound fury settled on the Emperor's perfect features. He had offered this primitive the galaxy. He had offered him salvation, and the man had spat in his face, choosing Xenos filth and sentimental folly over the manifest destiny of his own species. "So be it." The Emperor's voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "You have chosen the Xenos over your own kind. You are not a king. You are a traitor, a failed asset." He raised his hand, his psychic power gathering, a golden fire that would have erased Aragorn, Gandalf, and their companions from existence in a single, cleansing blast. "My lord," Theoden's voice, new and strong, but filled with terror, cried out from his knees. "Saruman! The army of Saruman marches on the Hornburg. They are 10,000 strong. They will be here by nightfall." The Emperor paused, his hand still raised, the golden fire crackling around his gauntlet. He looked at Theoden, then at Aragorn. His cold, tactical mind re-evaluated the situation. This heretical wizard, Saruman, was the immediate, tactical threat. Aragorn and his deluded companions were an ideological, strategic threat. The lesser threat could be dealt with first. He lowered his hand. The golden fire dissipated. "You are beneath my contempt," he said to Aragorn and Gandalf. "You are an irrelevance. But the heretic, Saruman, and his mutant army must be purged. I will deal with them. And then," he promised, his voice a cold vow, "I will deal with you." He turned his back on them, a gesture of absolute dismissal, and strode from the Golden Hall, his new army of Rohirrim scrambling to follow their golden god to war. Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli were left alone in the hall, trembling, their hearts filled with a new and terrible despair. They had just survived a confrontation with a power that made Sauron seem like a lesser shadow, and they had just made him their enemy. The march to the Hornburg was a grim, silent affair. The Rohirrim, now numbering in the thousands, rode not with their usual boisterous courage, but with the silent, fanatical, and terrified zeal of a holy crusade. They were no longer the army of Theoden. They were the golden host of their new, living god. Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli rode with them, but apart. They were now prisoners, in effect, tolerated, only because the Emperor's focus was on the coming battle. "He is a monster," Gimli muttered, his knuckles white on his axe. "He makes Sauron seem reasonable." "He is not a monster," Gandalf said, his voice low and heavy. "He is perhaps far worse. He is a solution, a final, terrible solution to all the world's chaos. And that is a temptation that can break civilizations." They arrived at the fortress of Helm's Deep. The Emperor surveyed the primitive stone construction with a critical, dismissive eye. "A flawed fortress," he declared. "The wall is weak. The gate is a liability. It will not matter." He did not concern himself with the arming of the men or the placement of the archers. He simply strode to the center of the deeping wall, a lone, golden figure, and he waited. As night fell, the army of Saruman arrived. It was a tide of 10,000 Uruk-hai, a force of pure, engineered malice, their heavy, iron-shod boots a thunder on the valley floor. They saw the great wall, and they roared, a sound of triumphant, bloodthirsty rage. They saw the lone, golden figure on the wall, and they laughed, a single, shining toy. "Dubers," the Uruk commander snarled, and he raised his hand. The charge began. 10,000 Uruk-hai, a wave of black iron and unstoppable muscle, surged towards the deeping wall. The Rohirrim on the wall, even Aragorn and Legolas, braced themselves, their weapons ready, their hearts pounding. This was it, the battle for their survival. The Emperor of Mankind raised his hand. He did not wait for them to reach the wall. He did not wait for them to raise their ladders. He was a being of absolute, overwhelming power. To allow a protracted battle would be inefficient, a waste of time and resources. He unleashed his will. He did not use fire. He did not use his sword. He unleashed a focused, psychic firestorm. A golden, blinding light, a new sun, erupted from his form. It was not a physical fire, but a wave of pure, annihilating, anathema energy. It washed over the valley. The Uruk-hai in the front rank, their battle cries still in their throats, were the first to die. The golden light touched them, and their bodies, minds, and souls were not just burned, they were erased. Their dark, corrupted spirits, the mud-born essence given to them by Saruman, were instantly and permanently unmade, dissolved into nothingness. The wave of golden light rolled over the valley. It was a silent, beautiful, and utterly horrifying apocalypse. The 10,000 Uruk-hai were incinerated. Their steel armor, their iron blades, their massive siege ladders, all were vaporized. The very rocks of the valley floor glowed white-hot and then melted into a sea of glass. The battle was over in less than 10 seconds. The Emperor lowered his hand. The golden light faded, leaving him standing, a serene, unmoving figure, on the deeping wall. Below, the valley was no longer a battlefield. It was a smoking, glassy crater, utterly devoid of life. A profound, terrified silence fell over the fortress of Helm's Deep. The Rohirrim, who had been prepared to die for their homes, simply fell to their knees, their minds broken by the sheer, divine, and terrible power they had just witnessed. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stood on the wall, their weapons held uselessly. They were trembling. They had just watched their entire enemy army, a force that should have tested them to their limits, be annihilated as an afterthought. "By the Valar," Legolas whispered, his elven composure shattered. "This is not a king," Aragorn said, his voice a hollow, terrified realization. "This is not a tyrant. This is the end." The Emperor of Mankind did not savor his victory. He did not pause to accept the worship of his new, terrified subjects. The battle at Helm's Deep was not a war. It was an extermination, a cleansing, and it was incomplete. The source of the mutant army, the heretic Saruman, still remained. He turned from the smoking, glassy valley. He looked at Theoden, who was still kneeling, his face a mask of awestruck terror. "Hold this fortress," the Emperor commanded. "Tend to your wounded." "Oh, there are none." "Then, wait." He turned to Gandalf and Aragorn, who were watching him with a mixture of horror and dread. "You, psychers, traitors, you will witness my justice." Before they could react, the Emperor reached out his will. He was a being of godlike psychic power. He did not need a ship. He did not need to walk. He simply moved. He seized the minds of Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and he teleported. Reality tore. The four companions screamed as their very atoms were dematerialized, transported across the leagues in a vortex of golden, psychic energy, and rematerialized. They found themselves standing not on the wall of the Hornburg, but in a dark, circular chamber at the pinnacle of a great, black tower. The air was filled with a subtle, whispering voice. It was the chamber of Saruman, at the top of Orthanc. Saruman, who had been staring into his palantir, watching the destruction of his army in disbelief, spun around. His face, which had been a mask of horrified shock, now became one of pure, abject terror. Before him stood Aragorn, Gandalf, and the 2-foot-tall, golden-armored god who had just annihilated his entire legion. "You," Saruman breathed, his hand instinctively rising. His voice, the power that had swayed kings, his only remaining weapon. "Kneel," he commanded, pouring all his Maiar power into the single, dominant word. The Emperor stood, unmoved, his luminous eyes filled with a cold, analytical contempt. Saruman's voice, a weapon of subtle, psychic manipulation, washed over his mind and dissipated, as useless as a single drop of rain on a raging star. "Your voice is the pathetic trick of a lesser psyker," the Emperor stated. He did not raise his hand. He did not draw his sword. He simply judged. He reached into Saruman's mind. He did not probe. He did not scour. He seized. Saruman screamed, a high, thin, terrible sound. He had been a proud, divine spirit, a Maiar of Aula, the great smith. Now, his mind, his very being, was in the grip of a power that was unimaginably vaster, colder, and more ancient than his own. The Emperor did not just read his mind, he consumed it. He tore every secret, every piece of lore, every memory from Saruman's soul. He learned of the Valar, of the Maiar, of the creation of Arda, of the long history of the Rings of Power, of Sauron's nature, and, most importantly, of the One Ring and its one, single, foolishly designed weakness. When he was done, in the space of 5 seconds, he had all the knowledge he needed. Saruman was no longer useful. "You are a traitor to your purpose, wizard," the Emperor said. "You have squandered your power and allied with the great enemy. The sentence is death." He didn't just kill him. He burned him. A golden, psychic fire ignited in Saruman's eyes. The wizard convulsed, his body arching, his final scream silent. His spirit, his divine Maiar essence, was being incinerated, scoured from existence by the Emperor's anathema power. Saruman collapsed, a blackened, smoking, empty husk. Gandalf and Aragorn watched, paralyzed, as the being they had thought an ally was unmade. The Emperor turned his attention to the object on the obsidian pedestal. The Palantir. He placed his golden gauntlet upon it. He would now face his true rival. The Emperor of Mankind laid his hand upon the Palantir of Orthanc. He did not look into it as Saruman had. He seized it. He poured his own, golden, psychic will into the ancient, Noldoran Seeing Stone, instantly mastering its power, turning it from a window into a weapon. He reached through the void, bypassing the lesser stones, and aimed his consciousness directly at the source of the shadow. He aimed at the Master Stone in the dark tower of Barad-dûr. Sauron was waiting. He had felt the annihilation of his Nazgûl, the destruction of Saruman's army, and the final, agonizing, psychic scream of Saruman himself. He knew this Golden King was coming for him. The great eye, lidless and wreathed in flame, filled the orb, a vortex of pure, ancient, and absolute malice, ready to dominate and destroy the mind of whomever dared to look. The eye of Sauron met the mind of the Emperor. The psychic duel was a cataclysm that transcended physical space. It was a war fought in the heart of the Immaterium, on the very spiritual plane of Middle-earth. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli were thrown to the floor of Orthanc, not by a physical blast, but by the sheer, psychic overspill of the battle. The air in the chamber became a physical, crushing weight. The very stones of the tower began to groan and crack. In Mordor, the ground of the Gorgoroth plains shook. Orodruin rumbled, its fires flaring in sympathy. The great eye atop the Barad-dûr wavered, its baleful, red light flickering as it was met by a golden, radiant, and utterly overpowering force. Sauron screamed, a soundless, psychic roar of pure, disbelieving rage. He was a fallen Maiar, a god of this world. His will was the power that bent mountains, that enslaved kings, that held a continent in dread, and he was being overpowered. He was not fighting a mortal. He was not fighting an elf. He was fighting a being whose very soul was a weapon, a being who had fought and held back 4 true gods of chaos for 10,000 years. The Emperor's mind was a golden, unstoppable, ordered sun. Sauron's was a dark, chaotic, and bottomless void. The sun was pouring into the void. The Emperor pushed. He was not just defending, he was assaulting. He drove his golden will through the Palantir, through the psychic defenses of Barad-dûr, and he struck at the very essence of the Dark Lord. Sauron's eye flickered wildly. His tower shook to its foundations. He was losing. He was being psychically battered, his own dark will being broken, beaten back by a force of pure, hierarchical, and utterly tyrannical order. He felt a terror he had not known since he knelt before the Valar at the end of the First Age. With a final, desperate, agonizing effort, Sauron tore his consciousness away. He shattered the connection, his own Palantir exploding, the great eye vanishing from the orb in Orthanc. The psychic backlash sent the Emperor stumbling back a single step, his golden armor humming. He was, for the first time, breathing heavily. He had won the duel. He had broken his rival's will, but he was frustrated. He had struck the enemy, had overwhelmed him, but he had not destroyed him. He had felt it, in that final moment. Sauron's essence, though battered and terrified, was anchored, tethered to the physical world by an external, magical artifact. Sauron was immortal. He could not be destroyed by a simple psychic assault, no matter how powerful. The Emperor, his mind now holding all of Saruman's knowledge, understood. The One Ring, the anchor of the daemon's soul. The Emperor of Mankind stood in the silent chamber of Orthanc, his mind processing the new, critical information. His duel with the major warp entity, Sauron, had been a victory, but not a decisive one. The enemy's spirit was immortal, bound to a physical artifact. He reviewed the knowledge he had torn from Saruman's mind. The One Ring, forged in the fires of Orodruin. Its one, single, fatal flaw. It could only be unmade in the same fires. He also reviewed the plan of his new enemies, Gandalf and Aragorn, a plan Saruman had glimpsed through his spies in the Palantir. A quest. A secret, desperate mission to send a halfling, an inferior, abhuman subspecies, on a stealth mission to carry the artifact into the heart of the enemy's territory. The Emperor's logical, strategic mind, the mind that had conquered a galaxy, reeled at the sheer, unadulterated, and sentimental stupidity of the plan. It was inefficient. It was childish. It was a gamble of such astronomical foolishness that it bordered on the insane. To stake the fate of an entire world, the fate of humanity on this lost planet, on the will of a single, weak, and easily corruptible creature. It was a heresy against the very concept of sound, logical strategy. He looked at Gandalf and Aragorn, who were now picking themselves up from the floor, their faces pale with terror and awe. "Your plan is a failure," the Emperor's voice boomed, a statement of absolute fact. "You would trust the fate of your species to a creature of no consequence, on a mission with a near-zero probability of success. It is the height of sentimental, primitive folly." "It is the only way," Gandalf retorted, his voice trembling but defiant. "The ring cannot be wielded. It will corrupt any who try. Its only path is destruction. And that path requires secrecy, not a golden god marching to war. The emperor regarded the wizard with a look of cold, profound pity. You are bound by the rules of your own, small, magical world, old man. You see the problem, but you are blind to the solution. You are correct. The anchor must be destroyed. He turned his gaze from the wizard to the Palantir, the seeing stone that he now commanded. But you do not send a child to do the work of a god. His mind, a supercomputer of strategic brilliance, had already formulated the true, final, and logical solution. Target: the One Ring, Sauron's demonic anchor. Location of target: with the halfling, currently. He scans the Palantir, his will sweeping across Middle-earth, and almost instantly finds the psychic spoor of the ring in the land of the Xenos witch Lothlorien. Ultimate destruction point: the Crack of Doom, a specific geothermal anomaly within the Mount Doom, a volcano, in the enemy's primary territory, Mordor. Problem: the ring is not at the destruction point. Inefficient solution: a 9-month-long high-risk quest by a single compromised halfling. Logical solution: deliver the point of destruction to the artifact? No, impossible. Therefore, the only logical solution is to destroy the destruction point itself. If the ring could only be destroyed in the fires of Mount Doom, then the Emperor would simply destroy Mount Doom. He did not need to send an army. He did not need a quest. He was the master of mankind. He was a psychic being on a level that this world could not even comprehend. He had the power. He had the coordinates. He had the will. Your quest is over, wizard, the Emperor stated. I will end this. Now, the Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, made his decision. He would not play this world's foolish game of quests and prophecies. He would end this war, this eternal conflict, with the same cold, absolute, and overwhelming logic he had applied to 1,000 other, more significant threats. He stood in the chamber of Orthanc, the captive Palantir, now a tool of divine, imperial targeting. He turned to Gandalf and Aragorn. You will remain here, he commanded. You will witness the true salvation of man. He placed his golden gauntlets on the seeing stone. He was not looking into it. He was looking through it, using its connection to the Master Stone in Barad-dûr as a targeting lock. He had the precise psychic coordinates of Sauron's tower, and, by proximity, the fiery, volcanic mountain that stood beside it. He closed his eyes. He reached deep within himself, past the 30,000 years of knowledge, past the warrior, past the general, past the king. He reached into the core of his being, the raw, blinding, cosmic-scale power of the anathema. He, who held back the chaos gods with his very will, would now unleash an infinitesimal fraction of that will upon a single physical point in this new, fragile reality. He was not a Maiar. He was not bound by the Song of the Valar or the rules of Eru. He was an external, alien, and superior power, and he would enact his judgment. He gathered his psychic might. It was a golden, burning, star-sized concentration of pure, ordered force, and he unleashed it. He did not launch a fleet. He did not fire a weapon. He simply willed it. Across the continent, in the black, ash-choked land of Mordor, the sky tore open. Sauron, in his dark tower, his mind still reeling from his psychic duel, looked up in a final, sudden, and utterly uncomprehending moment of terror. A new sun had just been born in the sky above his land. But it was not a sun. It was a single, blinding, golden beam of pure, focused, annihilating light. It was a spear of divine, cosmic-scale energy, descending from the heavens. It was not aimed at Barad-dûr. It was aimed at Orodruin. At Mount Doom, the golden lance of the Emperor's will struck the mountain. It did not cause a simple eruption. It was not a physical impact. It was an act of absolute, total, and conceptual unmaking. The mountain vaporized. The fiery, magma-filled chambers, the ancient, rocky slopes, the very foundations of the volcano, were annihilated in a single, silent, blinding flash of golden light. The Crack of Doom, the one, single place where the ring could be destroyed, was gone. And the One Ring, The ring, which was at that moment resting in a box in the safe hidden chamber of Frodo Baggins in Lothlorien, suddenly shrieked. It was a high, thin, psychic wail of pure agony and confusion. Its connection to its past, to its future, to the very concept of its own unmaking, had been retroactively and violently erased. But the Emperor had not just destroyed the mountain. He had destroyed the ring's anchor in a conceptual sense, and in doing so, he had miscalculated. The ring, its path to destruction now gone, its master Sauron still alive, was suddenly unbound. Its power, which had been tied to Sauron and to its own, eventual, fiery fate, was now free. Sauron, in his tower, felt the change. He felt his own essence, which had been tied to the ring, suddenly, violently recalled. The ring, in its moment of liberation, was calling to its master, pulling his soul, his power, his very being back to it, to be made whole once more. In Lothlorien, Frodo Baggins screamed as the ring on its chain exploded in a flash of black, fiery energy, its power surging, its will now utterly, completely dominant. Sauron, his full, unmitigated power, his entire, ancient, Maiar essence, poured across the dimensions and seized his long-lost vessel. In Orthanc, the Emperor of Mankind's eyes snapped open. He had failed. He had not destroyed the daemon. He had liberated it. He had broken the rules of this reality, and in doing so, had triggered a catastrophe. In Lothlorien, the body of Frodo Baggins went rigid. He rose into the air, his eyes burning with a new, vast, and terrible fiery light. The full, undiluted power of the Dark Lord Sauron, now whole, complete, and in possession of his ring, had been reborn, not in Mordor, but in the very heart of the elves' sanctuary. The Emperor looked at Gandalf and Aragorn, his face a mask of cold, terrible fury. His logical, scientific solution had resulted in an illogical, magical catastrophe. Inefficient, he growled. He turned, his golden armor blazing. He would have to purge this world personally. His great crusade for Middle-earth had truly and terribly just begun.